Folks, it's going to be harder in the future to ensure OpenClaw still works with Anthropic models. Peter Steinberger posted that exact warning on April 10th. We are synthesizing two events for you today. A TechCrunch report detailed Anthropic suspending Steinberger, creator of the OpenClaw framework for suspicious activity. Then a Nikkei Asia report revealed a Chinese startup called Rokid is embedding that identical OpenClaw framework into wearable smart glasses launching in Japan and Europe. We are watching a multi-billion-dollar industry panic over who controls the underlying computer code.
Anthropic instituted a pricing change precisely because their flat-rate subscriptions were hemorrhaging cash under that compute load. Users ran these continuous reasoning loops through third-party harnesses like OpenClaw.
The heavy compute cost of these AI agents terrifies these companies. Paying an AI agent to run a continuous reasoning loop, it feels like the anxiety of checking if you left the stove on. You pay someone $1 to run back and check the stove once. A continuous reasoning loop requires paying someone to check that exact same stove 1,000 times a second forever until their retinas burn out.
Anthropic declared simple prompts are covered by your $20 subscription. Autonomous claws are now subject to a consumption-based API billing model. They basically slapped a claw tax on developers. The entire business model collapses if users treat an AI like an infinitely patient employee working for pennies.
A single graphics processing unit consumes massive amounts of electricity. An agent looping continuously, it pins that processor at maximum capacity.
Anthropic realized their infrastructure was literally melting under the weight of automated tasks.
A user paying the new claw tax still gets banned, though. Steinberger stated he followed their new billing rule. He used his API account and he paid for his consumption. Anthropic flagged his account for suspicious activity anyway. The timeline makes the official corporate narrative fall apart immediately.
They banned his account early Friday morning. His post on X went viral. A few hours later, his account was fully reinstated.
An Anthropic engineer even showed up in the comments, claiming they never ban anyone for using OpenClaw. I need you to explain the mechanics behind this flag. A developer pays for API usage according to the provider's own terms. The credit card clears. The tokens are metered. What triggers a suspicious activity alert for an open-source tool operating within the stated bounds of the platform?
Steinberger draws a salary from OpenAI. An open-source developer's stress testing tools registers as a minor anomaly. An OpenAI employee running massive continuous reasoning loops against Claude's API registers as corporate espionage.
They assume someone is extracting their training data to improve a competing model. Steinberger claims he was just ensuring his framework still functioned with their latest updates.
Anthropic monitors traffic patterns to protect their proprietary model weights. An account firing off thousands of complex API calls in milliseconds looks exactly like automated scraping. The automated defense systems only see a rival IP address vacuuming up compute cycles at a superhuman rate. The security protocols trigger a ban before a human ever reviews the logs.
Steinberger's response to a commenter criticizing his move to OpenAI exposed the hostility in Silicon Valley. He wrote, "One welcomed me, one sent legal threats." Anthropic sent legal threats to an independent developer building a wrapper that made their own AI model more useful.
Tech companies court open-source developers to build out their ecosystem for free. The corporations wait until a tool becomes essential to users. Executives clone the tool into their closed ecosystem. Lawyers weaponize the terms of service to kill the original creator.
Anthropic built an audience on the backs of independent developers. They are systematically purging those same developers the moment they establish their own competing products.
Anthropic offers its own proprietary agent called Cowork. They rolled out Claude Dispatch to let users remotely control agents and assign tasks.
Steinberger accused Anthropic of copying popular open-source features into their closed harness just weeks before locking out independent developers. The rollout of Claude Dispatch happened directly before they changed the OpenClaw pricing policy.
They built a competing product. They made the open-source alternative prohibitively expensive to run. The underlying mechanics of an API call make this financially devastating for independent developers. Every time OpenClaw makes a decision, it sends the entire history of the conversation back to the server. The context window inflates with every single turn.
The technical distinction between a prompt and an agent explains the panic over compute costs. Standard prompting is ordering a black coffee. You walk up to the counter and ask for the drink. An autonomous claw is sending that barista into the global supply chain to negotiate coffee bean prices and purchase a commercial roaster.
The amount of labor and resources burned in the background is staggering. A single user query spawns thousands of hidden API calls. The token context window inflates with every retry.
Let me make sure I understand the context window penalty. The model has no memory of the previous loop. The agent must attach the entire transcript of all its past failures to the new request just to know what to do next.
The stateless nature of the API demands that constant repetition. The server processes the entire history from scratch every single time the agent takes a step. An agent attempting to book a flight fails to read the airline website. The software retries the action.
Wow, the connection drops again. The claw tests a different browser string. Each of those attempts burns input tokens.
Anthropic watched users deploy these agents and realized their infrastructure was handling an unsustainable volume of background requests. Their $20 subscription model priced out casual text generation. It never accounted for autonomous web scraping loops holding connections open for hours.
Every failure requires the model to reread the entire history of its own mistakes. The token count grows exponentially. The compute costs skyrocket. Steinberger tests OpenClaw on Claude because his users still prefer Claude over ChatGPT for this specific coding framework.
He replied to a user saying he is working on that at OpenAI. The users prefer the rival product. OpenAI hired the creator of the framework specifically to close that performance gap.
Steinberger uses Claude strictly for testing to ensure updates to OpenClaw won't break things for the people relying on the Anthropic model. He acts as the connective tissue between competing megacorporations. He patches the holes in a system designed to be incompatible. He is practically begging OpenAI to improve their model so his community can stop relying on Anthropic entirely.
OpenClaw faces artificial friction on the desktop browser. The Nikkei Asia report shows this framework physically escaping the desktop. Rokid is bringing OpenClaw to AI glasses. They are launching in Japan and Europe this year.
U.S. companies fight over API billing structures. They send legal threats over browser extensions.
Chinese hardware manufacturers are bypassing the desktop bottleneck. Rokid moves autonomous agents into the physical world via wearables. They integrate the software at the hardware level to avoid browser-based restrictions entirely. The physical device becomes the new distribution channel for the open source code.
I am calling out the physical reality of this hardware play. We established continuous reasoning loops require server farms to process. Anthropic kicked developers off their platform and rewrote their entire billing model to survive the compute costs. I need to understand how this translates to a battery-powered device strapped to a human face. A pair of glasses has severe thermal limits.
The compute does not happen on the battery-powered glasses. The glasses act as a sensory input device, beaming real-time video and audio back to a server. The heavy reasoning loops happen in the cloud. The result is projected onto the lens.
You cannot run an autonomous agent locally on a lightweight wearable without melting the plastic. The battery drains in 4 minutes. The physical constraints of wearable technology contradict the compute requirements of continuous reasoning. A processor powerful enough to run OpenClaw locally would catch fire on your nose.
Rokid relies on ultra-low latency cellular networks to send raw video frames to an external GPU cluster. The API processes the video. The agent makes a decision. The server sends the text back to the glasses.
Okay, the hardware functions purely as a camera and a screen. The intelligence lives in a remote data center miles away from the user. The physical constraints of the hardware evaporate because the hardware is just a conduit for the cloud infrastructure.
The sensory input from glasses provides the agent with vastly more data than a text box.
You walk down a street in Tokyo. The Rokid glasses stream the street signs, the faces of passersby, the audio of traffic, and the layout of the intersection directly to OpenClaw. The agent analyzes that environment in real time. The software translates the signs.
The visual processing identifies points of interest. The underlying model runs continuous reasoning loops on your physical surroundings. The API usage for video frame analysis dwarfs the cost of text generation. Anthropic bleeds money on text-based OpenClaw usage.
The server farms powering live video analysis for smart glasses will require astronomical capital investment. Processing a 1-second video clip costs orders of magnitude more than processing a paragraph of text. Every frame of video is essentially a massive image file fed into the token window. A continuous video stream is a relentless barrage of token consumption.
ROG targets markets outside of China to establish an early foothold in wearable computing. They are launching in Japan and Europe to build user reliance on their hardware before U.S. companies resolve their software disputes.
Wearable AI glasses force the computer to adapt to the human environment. The desktop computer forced humans to adapt to keyboards and mice. An agent seeing the world through a camera lens requires spatial awareness. The API must capitulate depth and object permanence.
The token burn rate for visual processing scales exponentially compared to text. Rokid is betting that network speeds and API costs will eventually drop low enough to make this economically viable. They absorb the massive compute costs today to secure hardware dominance tomorrow.
The scale of this transition exposes the extreme fragility of relying on closed gatekeepers. Rokid embeds OpenClaw into their hardware because open-source frameworks allow hardware makers to bypass restrictive corporate partnerships. Rokid does not need permission from Anthropic to run OpenClaw, they just need the framework to remain functional.
Steinberger's battle with Anthropic proves functionality is never guaranteed. The gatekeeper alters the API rules. Corporate security flags the hardware manufacturer's server traffic as suspicious activity. The entire ecosystem rests on the whims of the company hosting the underlying model.
The hardware manufacturer takes all the physical risk. The API provider holds all the structural power. A single policy change from an American tech company can break 1 million pairs of glasses in Japan.
Anthropic and OpenAI centralize control over foundational models. Steinberger represents the independent layer sitting between the model and the user. The OpenClaw Foundation wants their tool to work for any model provider.
Steinberger builds a layer of abstraction. An OpenClaw user banned by Anthropic switches to an OpenAI model without rewriting their personal workflow. Big tech companies view this abstraction layer as an existential threat to user lock-in.
A user indifferent to the underlying model provider chooses the cheapest option available. That destroys monopoly pricing power. The tech giants want developers writing code that only functions on their proprietary systems. An open standard for autonomous agents threatens the entire economic foundation of the closed AI ecosystem.
They want you trapped in their specific ecosystem. Building your entire life around Claude Dispatch guarantees Anthropic owns your workflow. Routing that exact same work through OpenClaw ensures you own the process. The user swaps out the underlying brain whenever a better or cheaper model releases.
Big tech companies use legal threats and API bans to destroy portability. They claim to care about safety and suspicious activity. They actually care about user retention.
The corporate strategy requires trapping developers inside walled gardens. The open-source community provides the ladders to climb over those walls. The friction between these two ideologies generates massive collateral damage for independent creators. The creators build the tools, making the models useful. The models consume the creators once the tools become profitable.
The Rokid launch proves demand for agents outpaces corporate restrictions. Hardware companies find ways to deliver technology to consumers regardless of API disputes.
Anthropic makes OpenClaw impossible to run on their models. Rokid defaults their glasses to use OpenAI or an open-source model like Llama. The friction created by the Claw attacks accelerates adoption of competing models. Rokid simply points their API calls to a different server.
The glasses continue functioning. The user never notices the switch. The underlying model becomes a commoditized utility. Hardware companies prefer commoditized software because it lowers their operating costs. Rokid wants AI models to compete fiercely on price to make their smart glasses cheaper to operate.
Steinberger plays a very dangerous game working for OpenAI while maintaining an open-source framework. He claims to separate his work at the OpenClaw Foundation from his job at OpenAI. The tech community remains highly skeptical of that separation.
A major corporation pays the salary of an open-source maintainer. The direction of the open-source project inevitably aligns with the corporate strategy. OpenAI benefits massively if OpenClaw becomes the standard framework for smart glasses. They just need to ensure their models run it faster and cheaper than Anthropic's models do.
Steinberger's dual roles blur the line between independent innovation and corporate sabotage. He is building the exact tool his employer needs to crush their primary rival. He operates as a Trojan horse inside the open-source community.
The Anthropic engineer posting in the comments reveals internal confusion at these companies. The marketing and engineering teams promote open developer access. The legal and finance teams enforce API bans and consumption taxes.
The engineer offered to help Steinberger because engineers want models used in cutting-edge frameworks. The finance department suspended the account because continuous reasoning loops destroy profit margins. The corporate structure fights itself.
The product team builds a hammer. The finance team charges developers $1,000 every time they swing it. The public relations fallout from banning a prominent developer forces the company to reverse course. The internal panic over compute costs drives them to implement the ban in the first place.
These companies lack a unified strategy for handling autonomous agents. Autonomous agents are moving from desktop assistants to the primary lens through which we view reality. You walk down the street wearing Rokid glasses powered by an open-source agent. The software analyzes everything crossing your field of vision. Who actually controls that reality? Is the independent developer who wrote the code? Or is it the closed model gatekeeper sitting in a server farm thousands of miles away who can switch off your glasses mid-sentence with a single opaque, suspicious activity flag? Goodbye.